This stuff isn't legal trapping season type trapping. This is survival trapping. It's not something you're going to want to do unless you have to. There's plenty of good methods out there that are legal. They're a little more effective and a little more, gives you a broader range of possibilities once you're in the jam.
Aren't most critters and animals colorblind?
Most rodents have some yellows, oranges, and reds. Most canines can see blues and purples. Denim jeans are a bad way to go if you're coyote hunting. Any other color is fine because they don't see anything but blues and purples. I didn't know that either. But,
John, this is white an alert color for them too?
white can be an alert color. That's why I say dull it out a little bit. But if you walk out in the woods, people say, oh, hunter orange, it doesn't happen in nature. I've seen dead leaves that are just about hunter orange. They may not fluoresce like this does or like a hunter orange vest.
My whole backyard right now is all hunter orange.
But yeah,
It's ridiculous.
Depending on the type of tree. There's funguses that actually fluoresce. You'll see them glow at night in yellows and greens and oranges. So you can't say that man can make the color that nature can't make because you got the idea somewhere. You got the material somewhere.
Right.
Now, a single loop slip knot. You make one loop, cross it over, and bring the standing line through the loop. That's your standard single loop slip knot, okay? Generally, unless you bind it too tight, my target animal is bigger than a rabbit or a squirrel or smaller possum. It doesn't get 10, 15, 20 pound body weight. Bigger possums, coons, coyotes. I'm going to use a double loop slip knot, which means you just make two loops. Bring the standing line from the back to the front. It'll still slip through, okay? It'll still undo itself if there's nothing in the loop. But what it does is it tightens up tighter on the standing line itself. So you can set it at a given distance and tighten the standing line down. And it's gonna move a little slower. It's gonna add a little more tension as it slips closed. That generally binds up, just like my double loop on a snare wire, binds up on itself and helps to really lock down on it once they pull it tight. A bigger animal is going to have enough weight and energy to pull that tight, and it'll bind really tight. A smaller animal doesn't have the leverage and weight that they would need, so you use a single loop so it slips more easily, closes easier, and binds off. The more tension you put against one of these trigger systems, if I put a lot of tension up on this, that means I need a lot of tension to unhook it. The heavier I lift on this, the harder it is to separate. So if you have a light amount of tension holding this trigger system in place, just a couple of pounds of spring tension, doesn't have to be a lot. It takes a lot less motion to separate it, okay? The harder you're pulling up, the harder they have to hit it to release it, okay?
So the further out on the branch you go, the more
Well,
spring action.
I mean, this is very, very sensitive out here. It gets more backbone as it gets thicker. What I'm looking at is the angle that I'm pulling against my trigger. When I bend this down, I want it pulling straight up against the trigger. Okay? If I put it back here, it's going to be pulling away and it's more likely to set off on accident, wind blow, or something like that. When I put it out towards the end, as it bends, where this is the weak spot and bends the most, I want it pulling straight up against the trigger to make sure I'm pulling up on that L bracket into that L bracket. Okay? If it was pulling in this direction, it'd be hard to get it set properly.
Right, keep it set.
Yep. So I'm just going to put another simple slip knot here just for demonstration purposes. If I was really tying this off, I'd do a slow pitch on this. You'll mess around with this trying to find the right length, it might take you 2 or 3 sets to figure it out, how much length you need, how much tension you need. But once you get a decent setup going, you learn as you go.
Start to get a feel for it, how much
Yep.
you need for what your situation is.
Yep. That's why oftentimes I'll leave a lot of string loose while I'm making my set. And then once I'm done and I know it's working right, I'll cut the excess off. Now, right now, I'm not going to mess with 10 test runs. You get the idea, you can figure it out. The more practice you get. Like Ed said at our meet and greet, you can learn something, but you don't know it until you've done it.
Yeah,
You don't
2 or 3 times.
You don't really know what you're doing until you've practiced what you've learned several times and under different situations. Now, as simple as this, a little bit of spring pressure. Okay. Shh. The only person who barked at is Randy. See how that kind of sticks out a little bit from the ledge? I'm going to shave that down a little bit because it's bumping up against here and causing the trap to set.
It's not letting it lock in, right?
What's that?
It's not letting it lock in.
Well, so as the tension pulls up, it tips this spot is hitting and unsetting the trigger. So I just got to clear that just a little bit to make sure.
Okay.
Clear that to make a little bit of a better set. Take out a little bit of a...
I always think to myself, man, is this really needed? Do I really need? It's nice to see somebody else use more than one knife.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I generally try to use what my wife calls my surprise knife for everything, because the more comfortable I am with it, the easier it's going to come to hand when I need it.
Unless you're not going to cut.
Well,
yourself.
what's that?
Unless you're not going to cut yourself.
Right. Putting it away is much slower than getting it out.
Yeah, it's still pulling.
That's all right.
Now, instead of trimming that, could you have moved your upper knot?
I could have.
Okay.
I could have. Being that I'm not working with straight limb, you know what I mean, there's a little bit of bend here and there. It's easier just to take a twist, you know. Now I know I've got straight upward pressure. I know I've got enough pressure. And as I reset this, I just got to be careful not to twang that because it'll snap me in the eye.
Now, your anchor twig, for lack of a better term,
Yes.
how far do you anchor those when you're out?
These?
If you, yeah.
A lot of times, I'll use a sapling growing out of the ground. I'll use a thumb size, so I know it's got a root
So
system.
you know it's going to anchor.
If not, I'll take my shaped trigger, and I'll take my knife and I'll cut into it at an angle to get a barb sticking out. You know, you can almost, like a feather stick, when you make a feather stick, you peel a little bit away. And I'll get a barb sticking out so that when I stick it in the ground, it kind of anchors itself a little bit. You don't need a lot of, I mean, there's not a lot of upward pressure here. So it doesn't have to be, if I was using it for like a canine trap, something that's going to hold 20, 30 pound animal, or different situations where I might be setting this on a deer trail, I'm going to use a lot bigger spring pole, I'm going to use a lot heavier equipment, and my anchor will be a rooted tree. Okay, you can take a live tree, as long as there's a line down the side that is free of branches, and just cut a notch into the tree and let it, it'll live, it'll heal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You may kill a branch or two on this side by doing that, but you have a good solid anchor that it's going to take a hurricane rifle out of the ground. Now, with this single trigger set, this may be where something along the lines of a trail goes through a bramble bush, or there is some other weedy or woody cover. You know how a lot of times you'll be walking down a trail and you'll see like a groundhog trail or something, this little entryway in the brush and stuff on the edge, just a little hollow, come right out into the trail. Perfect place to set something like this. So as animals move through through their natural habitat, they're constantly pulling past weeds and brush and briars, and they feel that tension against them all the time, and they generally just push past it. That's what you want them to do with this. You want them to think it's a vine or a weed that's laying across the path, and I'll just push past, you know, just like you push past a briar when you're hunting something. You don't always take the time to trim it or move it back out of the way. You just kind of push it back and move past it. That's what you want. So that once they realize, once they have pushed past this to some extent, once that loop's opened up, you can bend this wire around. You can hang this just off a piece of alfalfa grass or whatever, little tiny briar twig, just so that it hangs open.
Just want to get it in their path.
You want it to hang in their path. You don't want it to be on the ground. The closer it is to the ground, the more likely they are to step through it. You want it to be between their first bending joint, elbow or knee on their front leg, and their chin height. So that their chin's here and the leg is there, and as they pull it, okay, now it tightens up on them, and of course they're going to start thrashing and tighten that even more. And this spring pull is going to give it a shock absorber, so they can't just break it free. If you do happen to get an animal at the bigger end of your setup's capabilities, you want a little bit of spring tension available so they don't just break it off.
Right.
Okay. You saw how tight it pulled this twist. Given enough time, enough tension, enough wear back and forth, they may get it out. They may get out of it. They may break the wire loose or break off, you know, the twig itself, the trigger itself. I like to use green wood for a trigger, and again, it's a curiosity thing. You know, they're walking by, they smell it. It's got dead wood is like a sponge, it'll soak up You cut greenwood, it bleeds out, so to push your scent away and
Yep.
replace it with its own.
Yep.
Simple stuff like that.
Yeah, you touch a dry twig with your hands and a dog can smell the dry twig.
Oh yeah, you can see it a lot of times.
Yeah.
If you're out working, you got any kind of sweat or any kind of moisture on your body, you grab a dry twig and you can see your fingerprint or handprint just from the moisture picked up from your hand. They're sponges, in all honesty. If the bark's off of it, it's a sponge.
Yep.
So that's, the simple set trigger. Whether it's a walk-through snare, such as the one I just built, okay, walk-through snare. You can set a double trigger snare, which I'll show you. Trigger number 1 down. Now we're going to work on our dual trap trigger, our dual post trigger. Basically, instead of the one post and having a straight up and down trigger system, the 2 locking L's, you've got L cuts on this trigger, on these trigger posts. Okay, see those there? And you take a branch. Again, you could do this with just a tiniest bit of spring pressure. I've already cut this string off, so I'd have to take it and retie it if I wanted more length. But what you want to do is, with this setup, with a double trigger with a crossbar, an H-bar trap trigger is what this is called, I would want to make sure I wrap 2 or 3 times around this trigger pull and then slide it to the middle. Because I want the pressure coming in a particular direction. I want to be able to tighten this down and turn it until the pressure is pulling into those trap triggers. Okay? So that as I pull down here, and I lock these in place, I want it to be pulling straight up so that these flat edges catch and it's not rolling like that. I'm going to try to keep it pulling into the trap instead of away from the trap. It can be hard to do. It can be hard to get them set up and get them both twisted at the right angle and get your pressure directly up against them. Like that. Another reason to use a slip knot, you can adjust it 100 times. About 80. So that, it's got, with this being under the spring tension it is, that's going to be a little hard to pop loose. But again, if this is a game trail, okay, that travels through underneath this, you get a trail where you see heaven forbid, skunk tracks, coon tracks, possum tracks. You get rabbit or groundhog that a lot of times will travel trails just through a weed field or along a fence row or along the edge of the forest where you have trees and stuff on one side, grassland on the other. When you find a trail that's a distinct path, figure out what's traveling that path. That'll tell you how high and how wide to set your triggers, and then set for the most common denominator. If it's an animal such as the size of a coon, you'd want it a little bit bigger than this, maybe a little wider, maybe a touch higher. Okay? Rabbit or something like that, it might be a little smaller. But if you can get, let's say you get rabbits, possums, and coons traveling on a path, set for the medium. Okay? Get your loop that's that big, as big as you can get it in between there, and like I said, just keep it a little way off the ground. Okay? You can use this same loop type setup. Just twist it onto there instead of onto here, and leave it so that it is opened up, taking up as much of that space as possible. Now this piece, because I built it for a different trap, is a little shorter. Hang, and generally you can two wraps around the twig and then twist it off like a bread tie. It's going to hold good enough. If you're going to do something like that, I would wrap it once on this side around, once on that side around, and twist it so that it can't slide off one end or the other. It's tied to that. It has a central focal point, so it can't pull off one end or the other as they struggle. Okay? And again, once they pull through and wiggle that snare, okay, whether they've pulled tension against the snare, either way, even if they're coming this way and they're pulling into the trap triggers, once they start thrashing, it'll do its thing. Okay? That's all it takes is a little bit of movement. And you may take 5 minutes getting it set, but the lighter the set is, the more likely you are to get a good, clean snare on it. You could use any of these trigger systems or multi-use This single trigger or double trigger, you can tie off, the double trigger is great because you can tie a line on either end of the H-bar, okay? Just bank line, I don't know, 20 feet of that 30-pound test with a hook tied on the end and a rock tied to it or a sinker. Pitch it out in the water, set your trigger, and anything that pulls on it, anything that takes that bait and runs with it, snap. Now it's set the hook and it's tied to a spring so it can't just run and break the line. Even if it's heavy enough to break 35, if it's heavy enough to break 30-pound line, bring a bigger stick. You can, with these snare setups, I showed them in small scale for small game. This H-bar snare, a lot of times you'll see in the woods where you'll be following a deer path and it'll go under a fallen log. It's hard for us to get under, but a deer walks under no problem. Generally, any kind of fallen log that goes across the trail and is between 3 and 5 feet high, perfect for a deer snare. You can carry one of these canine snares. They cost a couple of bucks. Now again, this isn't legal Ohio trapping. This is, I need to feed myself and might need the skin for warmth, okay? Canine snare costs a few bucks. Take a doubled layer of paracord, tie it through your swivel, take it up and attach it to a big old sapling, size of your arm or better. Attach it up a ways. Doesn't have to be under spring tension, okay? You don't have to pull it over and set a trigger. All you have to do is hang your paracord from there to where you're hanging this under your fallen log. All they gotta do is walk through there and get their head in. They're gonna keep pulling until it tightens down, and then they'll panic. They walk through briars and everything else all the time that pushes against their chest, and they walk past limbs. And so it's no big deal for them to feel this tension as it slides past them around their necks. You know, they'll pull their head aside, which will generally shake it even tighter onto their neck. Okay? And then when they get to the end, that's when the panic sets in. That's when they tighten this down hard. That's when they're going to start pulling with all 4 feet on the ground. They're putting several hundred pounds of pressure. That's why you double up your paracord. You double up your paracord and you make sure you tie it to a good, sturdy, springy sapling. That's so they can't just lunge against that paracord and snap it. It's got enough spring that they can't get that dynamic tension to snap it. And it'll just keep tightening up, and within a couple minutes, you're making meat. This stuff isn't legal trapping season type trapping. This is survival trapping. It's not something you're going to want to do unless you have to. There's plenty of good methods out there that are legal. They're a little more effective and a little more, gives you a broader range of possibilities once you're in the game.